the score of 22 to 14. 11-0. 11-0.
Sanderson signals deeper down the middle of the land ball for a touchdown.
Intercepted at the 32 by Derek Smith. He's to the 20. He's to his right. At the 17. He's to the 15. He's to the 10. To the 5. Touchdown Oklahoma.
To his left. To the 25. Splits two men. Now to his left at the 40. 45. He's got to go. All the way. Touchdown Michigan.
Rodgers takes the ball at the 30. He's hit and got away. Back upfield to the 35, to the 40. He's to the 45. He's to the 50, to the 45, to the 40, to the 35, to the 20, to the 10. He's all the way home.
The Great Gridiron Rivalries. Featuring Alabama versus Auburn. Nothing is quite as American as a college football Saturday. And perhaps nothing is quite so dramatic or compelling as the spectacle of two college football teams squaring off against each other, battling back and forth for 60 minutes, each team striving to defeat the other in front of thousands of cheering spectators. Those Saturday games are a tradition deeply embedded not only into the fabric of college life, but also American culture and history itself. Nowhere is this more evident than in the deeply rooted rivalries that have grown more substantial with every thrilling victory or crushing defeat over the past 90 years. When you consider the greatest matchups, you think of games like Ohio State versus Michigan, USC versus UCLA, Oklahoma versus Nebraska, Army versus Navy, California versus Stanford, Florida versus Georgia. Or how about Texas versus Texas A&M and Harvard versus Yale? These two series have been played for over 118 years. In the South, many believe the #1 college football rivalry is the Iron Bowl, played yearly between Alabama and Auburn. It has what many of the great rivalries have, a sometimes strong dislike for the other side, and fans who are consumed by this one game alone. But perhaps more importantly, it involves the entire state. It's doubtful that the small crowd who watched that first game played back in 1893 had any idea that such an intense rivalry would develop and still matter over 100 years later.
One day we had a fan day, and it's probably about, it's probably mid-August. All the fans come out and they celebrate the new guys that are there, and guys sign autographs and things like that. And particularly one day we was out there and a fan came up, a student, and he came up and he showed me the schedule. But he had, most people fold the schedules, they, half and half. But he had the schedule folded specifically 90-10. And he took the schedule and he said, "Frank, look, all these 9 games, I don't care if we win or lose." And he flipped it over just to that one game, and it was Alabama on the back. And he says, "You win that one, you've made my year." And I'll never forget that moment as long as I live, because that's obviously symbolizes to him what the entire football, season for most of the Auburn fans rely on. It's that one game. And if you're 0-9 and you beat Alabama, it's great.
The greatest thing I could say about the Alabama-Auburn rivalry was that when I was walking on campus as a freshman, as a recruit, and an older lady, she's probably about in her 60s, she came up to me and said, "Are you coming to this school?" And I said, "Ma'am, I don't know." She said, "Well, if you do, I don't care what you guys do the whole year, as long as y'all beat Auburn." And I knew right away, this 60-year-old woman, not only was she a football fan, but she knew which game was the most important. And it hit me from the beginning that this game must be really, really big, because just random people were walking up to me, and I'm still a high school kid, and they were saying, "There's only one game you got to win every year, and it's Auburn."
Along the way, there's been a long list of storied names involved. Coaches like Auburn's John Heisman, who in only his second game as head coach back in 1895, had his team defeat Alabama convincingly in Tuscaloosa 48-0. Or Alabama's Bear Bryant, truly an icon, with teams of perennial contenders, 323 wins against 85 losses as a head coach. Players like Auburn's Heisman Trophy winners Pat Sullivan and running back sensation Bo Jackson, against future NFL professionals like Alabama's Joe Namath and Ken Stabler. Through it all, there's been the Iron Bowl. Year after year, game after game, victory after victory, or worse, defeat after defeat. From that humble beginning back in 1893, each game has evolved, adding to the legend, the history, the rivalry.
Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Nebraska, those are like great rivalries against your next door neighbors. And those are like, you want to beat them, but you know what, you just hope to beat them. But after the game is over, you kind of go to your own state and you do your own thing. These are our brothers that are inside the same state, you know what I mean? You can't go nowhere without seeing an Auburn license plate. You can't go nowhere without seeing an Alabama license plate. That state has no professional teams. It has nothing else but football. And once you get into that state, you're going to pick a side and you're going to stay on that forever.
One of the things I think that separates Auburn from the rest of them is that Auburn and Alabama are in-state schools. Those other schools are not. I mean, Michigan and Michigan State maybe, but it's not Michigan and Michigan State. It's Michigan and Ohio State, or it's Notre Dame and somebody else outside of the state. But when it's an in-state rivalry, you can't beat it. Arizona and ASU, another big one. But I think that anytime you have in-state rivalries, those games mean more than the rivalries when when a team is from different states.
Mm-hmm. After the 1907 game, which ended in a 6-6 tie, Alabama and Auburn would not play each other again until 1948. After much anticipation and many political efforts, the Iron Bowl was finally resumed at Birmingham's Legion Field. Alabama, which by then had earned a national reputation with 7 bowl wins between 1926 and 1946, including 5 in the Rose Bowl, overwhelmed the Tigers 55-0. So more than anything else, it is the modern era of college football that defines this rivalry, 1948 to the present day. In 1949, Alabama would be upset by Auburn 14-13, while in 1950, Alabama would avenge that loss with a 34-0 win. Alabama halfback Bobby Marlowe would score 3 TDs as Auburn went 0-10 for the first time in school history. By the time the 1951 game was played, Auburn had a new head coach in Ralph Shug Jordan. Jordan spent the previous 5 years as a line coach at the University of Georgia. By 1957, Shug Jordan and his Auburn team had a 3-game win streak against Alabama in hand. When the season finale against the Tide finally arrived that year, the Auburn Tigers had a record of 9-0 and were the #1 ranked team in the country. They needed a win to claim their first national championship. The game was played in freezing temperatures, and the Tide was done in by their mistakes. Tiger fullback Billy Atkins scored a couple of touchdowns on short runs after Alabama fumbles. On defense, Tommy Lorino returned an interception 79 yards for a score. While center Jackie Burkett went 66 yards on yet another pick for a TD. Auburn led 34-0 at the half. And before it was over, the Alabama side of Legion Field had been empty to fans by either the weather, the score, or the Tide's 2-7-1 record. The final score would be 40-0, and the Auburn Tigers would be crowned the national champions. Overshadowing that achievement was the announcement that Alabama had hired Paul Bear Bryant, a former Crimson Tide player and coach at Texas A&M, as its new head coach. The last game of the 50s saw Auburn's 5-game winning streak come to an end as Coach Bear Bryant won his first game against Auburn with a 10-0 victory. Like in the previous year, diminutive back Marlon Dias scored Alabama's only touchdown on a 39-yard pass from Bobby Skelton in the third quarter. Only this time, the final result was different. The 60s were mostly about Alabama. The 1961 contest saw Tide quarterback Pat Tremmel engineer a 34-point win over Auburn. Alabama was ranked number 1, and their defense had shut out 5 previous opponents coming into the contest. This game continued that trend, as the Tide's defense did not allow Auburn to even get close enough for a field goal attempt. With its Iron Bowl victory, the vaunted Crimson Tide claimed its first national championship in 20 years and first ever for Bear Bryant. The next 2 years, the team split. In 1962, under quarterback Joe Namath, Bama beat Auburn and finished the season 10-1. In '63, the Tigers returned the favor. The '64 game would be another thriller, as Alabama once again beat Auburn 21-14. And although Namath was limited by a knee injury, he was still instrumental in helping the Tide win its second national championship under Bryant. Joe Namath's 3-year Alabama career was marked by a 29-4 record. Overall, he completed 203 passes on 374 attempts for 2,714 yards and 25 TDs. In the NFL, Namath had a Hall of Fame career with the New York Jets that included a stunning MVP performance in Super Bowl III. '65 was another big year for the Tide, as they handily beat Auburn 30-3. While Auburn halfback Robert Barrett sets a school record for the most kickoff return yards in a single game with 155 on 6 returns, Tiger QB Alex Bowden unfortunately sets another single-game record with 7 interceptions. With an Iron Bowl victory, Alabama won its second consecutive national championship under Bryant. 1966 saw the Crimson Tide go undefeated at 11-0, but finished behind both Notre Dame and Michigan State in the AP poll. With Kenny Stabler at quarterback for the second year, the Tide beat a rebuilding Auburn team 31-0. Ken Stabler's career in many ways mirrored that of his predecessor Joe Namath. During his Alabama career, the Snake played on teams that compiled a 28-3-2 record. He was the Orange Bowl MVP in '66, as well as the SEC Player of the Year. In 1992, Stabler and Namath were selected as quarterbacks on Alabama's All-Century team. While Stabler was a first-round selection of the Houston Astros in baseball, he turned down that offer to play football with the Oakland Raiders. In 1977, the Raiders, with Stabler at the helm, would win Super Bowl VI. The 1970s began with wide-open offenses as a trademark of both teams. However, the advantage now rested with Auburn and its quarterback, Pat Sullivan. In that year's Iron Bowl, Auburn would win 33-28 on the passing of Sullivan and the receiving of Terry Beasley. On the Alabama side, running back Johnny Musso would run 42 times for 221 yards. 1971 was another landmark year as Alabama switched to the wishbone. They shocked USC in their first game 17-10 and then crushed the Tigers in the last 31-7. However, Auburn QB Pat Sullivan would win the school's first Heisman Trophy, an award named after one of the team's earliest head coaches. From 1969 to 1971, Sullivan and Beasley would turn out to be Auburn's most prolific passing combination, connecting for more than 2,500 yards and nearly 30 TDs. In Sullivan's Heisman Trophy winning season, Auburn went 9-2. He completed 162 passes on 281 attempts for 2,012 yards and 20 TDs. he added another 84 yards and 2 TDs rushing. In his Auburn career, he was a 2-time All-American and 2-time SEC Player of the Year, led Auburn to 3 bowl games, and accounted for 71 TDs in 3 years, 53 on passes, 18 on rushes, with a total of 6,843 yards of offense. After leaving Auburn, Sullivan would play in the NFL for the Atlanta Falcons. Alabama split the 1973 national championship with Notre Dame and went into the 1974 Iron Bowl undefeated against a once-beaten Auburn team. Alabama QB Richard Todd directed the attack, and along with the running of Calvin Culliver, the Tide went into halftime with a 17-7 lead. Auburn closed the gap slightly with a fake field goal, but then the Alabama defense was able to hold off the Tigers for a 17-13 win. In 1978, the Tide would beat Auburn 34-16 on its way to an 11-1 record and Bear Bryant's 5th national championship. And in 1979, while the Auburn Tigers were 8-2 coming into the Iron Bowl, Alabama was again undefeated and beat Auburn 25-18. Finishing with a 12-0 record, the Crimson Tide would win back-to-back championships again and 6th overall for the Bear. Coming into the 80s, Alabama continued to beat up on the Auburn Tigers, amassing a 9-game winning streak entering the 1982 Iron Bowl. The difference this year would be an Auburn running back named Bo Jackson.
Nobody split. Give the ball. Up and over and in, I believe. Touchdown. Touchdown, Auburn.
His 1-yard leap over the Alabama goal line capped a 66-yard drive and set the stage for a 23-22 Tiger victory. While many people consider this game a coming-out party for Auburn in the 1980s, it was a bittersweet moment for Coach Bear Bryant in his last-ever Alabama-Auburn game and one of his last games as a coach. Alabama head coach Paul Bear Bryant had a long and storied career with the Crimson Tide. As a player at Alabama, his teams went 23-3-2 from 1933 to 35. Later, as an assistant coach from 36 to 41, they went 38-12-6. In 1958, after returning to Alabama after coaching stints at Maryland, Kentucky, and Texas A&M, Bryant would lead the Crimson Tide for 25 years, amassing a record of 232 wins, 46 losses, and 9 ties. During his tenure, his teams would win 6 national championships, 13 SEC titles, and make 24 consecutive bowl appearances. He would be named SEC Coach of the Year 10 times and National Coach of the Year in 1961, 1971, and 1973. In 38 years as a head coach, Bryant would win 323 games, passing Amos Alonzo Stagg's record of 315, with 85 losses and 17 ties. Coach Bryant would pass away on January 26, 1983. He was not only one of Alabama's true legends, but one of college football's as well.
It seemed like it was a whole Alabama family, and they came up to me and said, "You know what? You're just a great player, Sean. We just want to tell you this. Bear Bryant would have loved for you to have been on his team, and that's the greatest compliment somebody can ever give you."
The 1983 Iron Bowl was one of the games that helped to create the Bo Jackson legend. In a 23-20 Tiger victory, the Auburn tailback rushed for 256 yards on 20 carries. Jackson had TD runs of 69 and 71 yards. The latter gave Auburn the lead for good. Few things in college football are as exciting as a last-minute win by either team. In the 1985 Iron Bowl, that scenario played out as place kicker Van Tiffin came on the field in the final seconds of an all-or-nothing drive to kick a perfect 52-yard field goal on the game's final play. Pandemonium reigned as Alabama came away with a 25-23 win. Despite the loss in 1985, Bo Jackson became Auburn's second Heisman Trophy winner. Jackson began his Auburn career in 1982 and in 4 years set numerous rushing records. He still holds the career rushing mark with 4,303 yards. His Heisman Trophy winning season saw him establish a single season record with 1,786 yards. While at Auburn, Jackson was also a standout baseball player that hit .401 in 1985. He turned pro in both sports in 1986 and became an all-star outfielder with the Royals and a Pro Bowl running back with the Raiders. Unfortunately, a hip injury cut short the playing career of this Superman. Late in the 1986 Iron Bowl, Auburn coach Pat Dye called a running play. Receiver Lawyer Tillman was in the game, and while he wasn't supposed to end up with the ball on that play, he took it on a reverse and scampered in 7 yards for the game-winning touchdown.
Going to pitch to Jesse, and he's going to give it to Tillman on the end around. The 10, the 5, Tillman. He's in! Touchdown, Auburn! Touchdown, Auburn! Lawyer Tillman on the end around reverse. 32 seconds left. Auburn is going ahead 20-17.
It would be the first rushing play of his collegiate career as Auburn won 21-17. The December 2nd, 1989 game between Alabama and Auburn would turn out to be one of the most historic dates in the history of the series. For the first time ever, the Iron Bowl would be played in Auburn.
Auburn's inside the Bama 2 for a second down play. Joseph goes up and over. Joseph is in! Touchdown, Auburn!
Not only that, it would be played on the same date as Auburn's 1972 miracle win over the Crimson Tide. Needless to say, the Tigers made it a day to remember.
To the left, the ball will be placed down on the near side hash mark by Dickinson. There's the kick. Kick is away. Kick is good! Auburn 30, Alabama 20. 33 seconds to go. Let the celebrating begin.
While number 2 ranked Alabama entered the game with a perfect 10-0 record, they left Auburn with a humiliating 30-20 defeat, ruining their national championship hopes. The rivalry was entering the 90s, and Alabama was on its way back to being a national power. Alabama would add yet another Iron Bowl victory, an undefeated season, and another national championship in 1992, as the Crimson Tide defeated the Tigers 17-0, went 13-0 for the season, defeated Florida in the SEC championship game, and then beat Miami in the Sugar Bowl. The Iron Bowl victory was highlighted by cornerback Antonio Langham's pick of a Stan White pass in the third quarter and returning it 61 yards for a TD that broke a scoreless tie. 1993 saw the Auburn Tigers on probation, but undefeated. The game was played at Auburn's Jordan-Hare Stadium, and Alabama quickly jumped out to a 14-5 halftime lead. After Tiger QB Stan White was injured, Auburn turned to reserve QB Patrick Nix. On his first play, a 4th and 15 from Alabama's 35, Nix hit wide receiver Frank Sanders with a pass in the end zone.
Alabama bringing everybody. Nix is going to float one for Sanders. Sanders, oh, he caught it at the 2, and he dived in. Touchdown, Auburn! Touchdown, Auburn! Oh, my goodness! Sanders went up over Tommy Johnson or Antonio Langham. He caught the ball at the 2. How he held it, I don't know, but he dived into the end zone, and Auburn's right back in the...
Pat he said, Frank, I'm coming to you. He dropped back, threw the ball up. And they had a guy named T.P. Johnson, a little bit shorter than me. And I out-jumped and got the ball, turned around, I dove in. And when I jumped up, man, it was just so much excitement. Again, we were down, made that catch, after losing Stan, our top guy. And to go through all those things, there was so much emotion in the stadium and in myself that, I mean, it's just, again, one of those things you just can't, you wish you can always have that feeling in life because it's one of those moments that's so exhilarating.
Then there was this touchdown run by fullback James Bostic to seal the victory.
Racing to the 45 to the 40, breaking a tackle to the 30, to the 20, to the 10, he's gone! Touchdown, Auburn! And the Auburn Tigers have put away the Crimson Tide by the score of 22-14. 11-0! 11-0! 11-0.
Stan White going down, our starting quarterback goes down. Then Jay Barker goes down for Alabama. Patrick Nix, a freshman quarterback, he comes in. That fourth down play when he comes in and coach says, you know, we're going to go for it, and he throws the ball up. I jump up, catch the ball, and I dive in, and it just was exciting. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard that type of exhilaration in Auburn and Jordan-Hare Stadium, I mean, ever. That just was one of the greatest moments. And I think also another big moment was when James Bostic, our running back, I mean, it was like third down or something, and he took the ball about 60-yard run right at the gut, and he bobbed and weaved, he dipped and dabbled, and he got to the end zone. And I mean, it just was like a relief, because that was one of the things that sealed the game for us. And so many moments happened in that game, so many, you know, ups and downs, but to come out with a victory, to tap off 11-0 season, couldn't ask for it any better.
It's been said that what goes around comes around, particularly when it comes to perfect seasons or winning streaks. The 1994 Iron Bowl saw Alabama ranked number 3, while the Tigers were ranked 6th. The Crimson Tide put Auburn behind early as they took a 21-0 lead into halftime. Again, Tiger QB Patrick Nix would attempt to save the day, leading Auburn to 2 second-half touchdowns. With only a minute left, Auburn drove to the Alabama 40, but failed to make a 4th and 3 play, leading to the final score of Alabama 21, Auburn 14.
Tough game, tough loss because of the way it ended. And I guarantee it probably was like that much of a difference on a first down and continuing the game and not. And for that referee not to call it, it was so tough. It stopped the game. It snapped a 20-game winning streak, but it also, it just hurt, man. It just hurt because we were trying to do something again that would have been, as our word that year was, audacity. It would have took a lot of audacity to repeat back-to-back seasons. But to lose to Alabama was just enough to, you know, to stifle that moment. But at the same time, it would have been just another elated moment.
Would Alabama fans consider it poetic justice that the defeat would end Auburn's 21-game unbeaten streak?
You took it to heart because you knew that not just you were affected or just the Auburn Tigers were affected, but every student, every alumni, and every fan that roots for Auburn in the history of Auburn is affected by that win or loss.
The 1995 game saw a return to Auburn's Jordan-Hare Stadium. While Alabama's offense exploded for 478 yards, the Tigers kept their perfect Jordan-Hare Iron Bowl record intact with a surprising 31-27 win.
From the eye set, the fake, the pitch to Davis, and he rolls out, and he's got a man wide open. It's Davis at the 20. He's at the 15, the 10, down the far sideline at the 5. He is gone! Touchdown, Auburn! 29 yards, and it scared me to death because I didn't think Davis was expecting the pass.
In the end, it came down to a 4th and 10 pass from the Auburn 22.
9 seconds to go. Here's the play. The deep snap. Kitchen back. Gonna throw in the end zone. No! Incomplete! It's incomplete! It's incomplete! Yes, yes, yes! Yes, Auburn, yes! 2 seconds left. This ball game is gonna be over.
1, 2, 3, 4,
The decade of the 90s and this incredible rivalry would be closed out in 1999 with a hard and close-fought 28-17 Alabama victory, marking the first ever Tiger loss in Auburn. In the game, Tide running back Sean Alexander sparkled with a 182-yard, 3 TD performance.
You know, I probably had about 80 yards in the first 3 quarters, but in the 4th quarter alone, I had 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. and we were just mashing them. And it was just a great feeling because we finally had that breath and we kind of warmed down a little bit, and then after that we just steamrolled them and we went after them with everything we got, and we had the game under control and we still wanted more. You see this? This is the actual jersey that beat Auburn for the first time in Alabama history, in Auburn.
It's good to finally come down here and win a football game. And I'm just lost for words to express just how proud I am of this coaching staff and these young men for the job that they have done.
The start of a new millennium in 2000 would mark the first time that the Iron Bowl would be played in Alabama's Bryant-Denny Stadium. Auburn won 9-0 with a strong defensive performance and with the foot of Damon Duval. It was the second shutout suffered by Alabama during the 2000 season, the most for them since 1957. Offensively, the Crimson Tide could only generate 23 yards rushing on 22 carries. Alabama would come back the next year in the 2001 Iron Bowl at Auburn, defeating the Tigers for the second straight time at Jordan-Hare Stadium. This time, the Tide outgained Auburn 549 yards to 272, as the Bama defense dominated the Tiger offense. Quarterback Andrew Zhao, starting in place of injured Tyler Watts, had one of the finest games of his career, passing for 221 yards. The Tide even had 2 100-yard rushers in the game, with Santonio Beard running for 199 yards and Ahmad Galloway gaining another 127. After a scoreless first quarter, Beard capped a 13-play, 88-yard drive with an 8-yard run. Then Auburn came back on a Ronnie Brown 5-yard run after the Cadillac, Carnell Williams, suffered a broken collarbone after quickly gaining 39 yards on 5 carries. After Auburn's score, the Tide began its suffocating domination. With less than 3 minutes left in the first half, Zhao, with 2 men wrapped around his legs, threw a touchdown pass to Jason McAdley from the Auburn 45, putting Alabama into the lead 14-7.
As I backed up, I got a little pressure and I got kind of nipped at me a little bit, and Jason was, my first guy going to. And I don't think he was open as much as I wanted him to be when I first looked at him, but then at the end, right at the end, he kind of broke open and I just was going down. I just put enough air under it and let him run to it, and with his speed, I knew he could get to it, so he got to it, and it was 6 points for him.
2 plays into the third quarter, Beard would take a handoff and race 47 yards into the end zone and a 21-7 lead. 2 more Alabama touchdowns in the fourth quarter would end the scoring. The final would be in Alabama's favor, 31-7. For Auburn, the stinging 24-point loss would be their largest deficit in the series since falling to Alabama 48-21 in 1977, and the loss would snap the Tigers' 12-game home winning streak. Finally, the 2002 Iron Bowl saw Auburn beat number 10 ranked Alabama by a score of 17-7. 67 total games, with Alabama ahead by 10 victories overall. However, it's interesting to note that in the last 10 meetings, each school has won 5 times. And in the last 19 meetings, Auburn actually holds a 1-game edge, 10-9. Out of all those head-to-head contests, there are certain games that are bound to stand out. Which game would Auburn fans consider their top win against Alabama? Maybe they think it's the 1972 game. With 5:30 remaining in the game, Alabama held what seemed to be an insurmountable 16-3 lead. Then, lightning struck. Linebacker Bill Newton blocked an Alabama punt, and defensive back David Langer returns it 25 yards for an Auburn touchdown. That alone was incredible, but 3 minutes later, it happens again. Newton blocks another punt, and again Langer returns it 20 yards for another score.
Great Greg Gant standing on his own 30. Auburn will try to block it. Auburn going after it. Here's a good snap.
In the final 5 minutes, Auburn has turned a 16-3 deficit into a 17-16 lead, ruining Alabama's perfect record and national championship hopes for good measure. On the other hand, Alabama fans might take pride in their 1981 28-17 come-from-behind victory, which would be victory number 315 for Bear Bryant. That victory allowed Bryant, certainly the symbol of Alabama football, to pass Amos Alonzo Stagg on the all-time college football win list. A fitting tribute to one of the finest coaches in the history of college football.
In college, it's the best of the best kids that you heard from other neighborhoods or other schools, and y'all all go to this great college to try to win a national championship. And then you find out, and within that race for the national championship is a couple of rivalries that are just special. And with that rivalry of Alabama-Auburn, it's like a war. You know, you don't care what's going on with that game. You don't care if you've got a twisted ankle, a bum knee. You're going to finish that game to make sure that your team is on top.
It's tradition, it's the fans, or it's the game. And those three things make it. And I think when you bring it all together, it's that will bring the hoopla, the hype, and the exhilaration of looking forward to either that last game of the season or when we play. And that's all that matters.
So now, as a new century has begun, it's interesting to consider where the rivalry will be in another 100 years. In the near future, will one team ever establish dominance over the other, as they have in the past? Or will there still be small winning streaks by each side here and there? Will Auburn continue to play the role of the spoiler? Will they ever become the favorite son in their home state? Will Alabama ever see another coach like the legendary Bear Bryant? Will they ever establish another dynasty? All interesting questions, but the answers will only fully be known 100 years from now, as two great universities compete against each other in a contest of wills, a football game known as the Iron Bowl.